If you've ever wanted to see the D-Day beaches with your own eyes, then this video is just for you. An epic, dedicated tour of all 5 landing beaches with me showing you the secrets of these amazing places. You'll see the German trenches, their bunkers, the fighting positions, and the beaches where those allies waded ashore. I'll also show you where the Allies fought amongst the towns and the villages on the coastline, showing you mapping and images from D-Day, as well as then now pictures from the locations where the photos were taken. Let's get started at Sword Beach. Normandy, 6th of June 1944. The ghosts of the invasion are everywhere, and in this episode we find the remnants of the defences that once dominated this area, and we explore an infamous strongpoint. This strongpoint had the highest concentration of enemy weaponry found on any of the D-Day beaches. So welcome back to Normandy, and in this episode we will visit Sword Beach, the British landing beach on the eastern side of the D-Day lodgement, butted up against the Orne River. The area we will start with is near Le Brec, and before we go to what is arguably the most heavily defended area of all of the D-Day beaches, we're then going to look at strongpoint 0880, codenamed the Cod Strongpoint. So we're here at Le Brec, and in a sort of square, it was here on D-Day where some amazing pictures were taken that we can still see in the buildings around us today. So the ghosts of the past have left us clues to find, and it's just a case of matching up those pictures. So let's see if I can keep this camera still. Now, this is a picture of British soldiers escorting German prisoners of war towards the beach. And from there, they would likely have been processed as prisoners of war for the remainder of the war. Right next to that building, there is another timber frame building with a really interesting picture taken there. And you can see the men in full battle dress carrying their equipment, and they must have just landed on the beach, their feet still wet from the Atlantic swell. And it makes you think about all the things that they had seen, and yet with that British humour, they've still got smiles on their faces. I'm now going to head back to the first location, as I've forgotten about another picture I wanted to get, and it's just between these two buildings. Quite windy today, actually. So here it is, the carriers with their wading panels still up on the sides, and the soldiers moving inland to continue the fight and try to push towards Caen. And hopefully I've lined this okay. Let me know what you think in the comments below. This is a picture that I'm not too happy with. The elevation isn't quite right. I think it was probably taken from on top of a vehicle. But you can see this building, which I have to say I always thought was like a 1960s style building. But it was actually here on D-Day, which is pretty cool. You can see the dispatch rider at the front and the carrier in the middle ground. This one's quite interesting because there is a extension on this building which sort of conceals the fact that this is the original timber building that you can see on the left. But if you look where the soldier's standing, there is a tramway, like a very small gauge railway, which used to run along the beach here, and there were stops at various points along here. That's no longer here. All the cars are parked here, so you can't see that, but hopefully we've lined this one up okay. It's quite difficult because, as you can see, there is a van parked right here where I'd like to stand and get this, but I think that's probably about as good as it's going to get. Now this is the final then and now picture before we move on to look at the strongpoint. And this is another one of British soldiers making their way inland on carriers with an AVRE or an armoured vehicle Royal Engineer in the picture, complete with the petard mortar on the front. We've got more petard mortars coming up in this episode. So we've seen Le Brec and a good opportunity to find some then and now photos, but we're now going to look at strongpoint 0880, codenamed Strongpoint Cod by the British and Widerstandsnest 20 by the Germans. Now, this position was built into a gridded system of holiday homes and villas, and it was fortified by the Germans. And they also built some formidable concrete bunkers here. On the 4th of November 1943, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel became General Inspector of the Western Defences. An experienced campaigner, he had seen firsthand the power of the Allied air forces in the African desert, their ability to inflict massive destruction and, of course, disruption deep behind enemy forward areas. But he also knew that at the tactical level, they had the ability to strike mobile columns and any armour that was reinforcing forward positions, and they would do that by using ground attack aircraft. So for that reason, Rommel knew that he couldn't rely on armoured support only to react to an invasion, and therefore the defences at the beach would have to delay the landing forces for as long as possible. Now, waiting to meet the British forces landing at Queen Beach, which is the sector we're looking at, were members of the 736th Regiment of the 716th Coastal Defence Division. Now, these were not equipped for manoeuvre. They were a static division trained to defend the beaches from their strongpoint positions. But Rommel had probably done about as much as he could do to prepare this sector of Normandy. Remember, he didn't know where the Allies were going to land, so he had to defend everywhere. And the old adage is, when you defend everywhere, you defend nowhere. So he formed a defensive crust to delay the landing forces, with his inland coastal batteries to suppress and attrit them further. And this would allow his dispersed armoured formations, and they had to be dispersed so they wouldn't be struck by Allied aircraft, to surge forward to the point of need and to counterattack. Now, the beaches were laden with multiple belts of obstacles. Rommel placed these mostly at the high tide mark, as he envisaged them landing here rather than at low tide, and clearly he thought they would land at high tide because it meant less distance for the infantry to cover in the open. So with all of that in mind, let's look at Strongpoint Cod and its mass of mutually supporting trench systems, beach obstacles and minefields to the rear of the position. And this was set amongst fortified villas on this beachfront area. So I've overlaid here the bunker positions, and here you can see a Doppelschatten in the centre and a R677 casemate on the left of the position as we look at it. But the structures you likely haven't seen before are these bunkers that are camouflaged to look like houses or villas. They conceal murderous weaponry. Next, we have these ring stand positions that house the powerful 50mm anti-armour guns. You would have seen these before, and they had one of these at the front of the position and one of these at the rear. These are devastating if they're firing into the flanks of armour and into landing craft. And finally, we have the well-known Tobruk. There are at least 4 of them on this position, capable of accommodating mortars or machine guns. And in this instance, it looks as though there were machine guns at the forward positions and mortars at the rear. So it's such a beautiful day here today. It's hard to imagine what happened here. And the first to land here were the DD tanks. And amongst those DD tanks was Lance Corporal Hennessy of A Squadron, 13th 18th Royal Hussars. Each side of us, other DD tanks were launching. To my right and behind me, I saw Captain Noel Denny's tank as it came down the ramp and into the sea. But behind it, I could see the large bulk of its LCT creeping forward. And in a very few minutes, the inevitable happened. The bow of the LCT struck the DD tank and forced it under the water. The tank disappeared beneath the LCT and was never seen again. Captain Denny managed to escape and was picked up, but the tank sunk and the rest of the crew was lost. There was nothing anybody could do, and it was our first casualties on D-Day. A Major A.R. Rouse of the South Lancs described the first desperate minutes of the free div landing. The boat crews had been ordered to go in at 4 knots and hit the beach hard. During the last 100 yards of the run-in, everything seemed to happen at once. Out of the haze of the smoke, underwater obstacles loomed up. We had studied them on air photographs and knew exactly what to expect, but somehow we had never realised the vertical height of them. Water fire was coming down on the sands. An 88mm gun was firing along the line of the beach, and there was continuous machine gun and rifle fire. Immediately ahead of us, a DD tank was enveloped in flames, unable to get off the beach, continued to fire its gun. The rapid enlargement of the bridgehead depended on the speed of which troops could be cleared away from the beaches, and the clearance of both beach obstacles and beach exits was therefore fundamental to the success of the landing. To achieve this, the British had developed specialist engineering equipment, or funnies, to tackle any number of these engineering issues, such as the AVRE with its flying dustbin mortar. There were tanks capable of laying a mattress on difficult terrain, and there was bundles or fascines which would be used to fill in ditches and holes and other obstacles. And finally, we have the crab or the flail tank, which is responsible for clearing lanes through minefields. Strongpoint COD actually consisted of 20 separate strongpoints within wire obstacles and interconnected trenches. It would take the combined efforts of the East Yorks, the South Lancs, and the supporting tanks and infantry from the No. 5 Beach Group and No. 4 Commando to overwhelm the German position. Next, we are off to Juno Beach. Original footage of the beach landings on D-Day is rare, even more so for the assault waves on the Juno Beach sector. In this video, we look at the location this footage was taken from, and we find the same houses that you can see in this footage. We also answer the question, just who was this man and what happened to him? The 1944 Battle of Normandy was one of the pivotal events of the Second World War and the scene of some of Canada's greatest feats of arms in its military history. On June 6, 1944, the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 2nd Armoured Brigade were tasked with establishing a bridgehead on the beach codenamed Juno. This was an 8-kilometre long stretch of beach between Sword Beach to the east and Gold Beach to the west. Juno Beach was characterised by pockets of urban areas and small towns that hugged the coast. Courcelles-sur-Mer, a port town, was anchored to the Swells estuary. To the east was Bernières-sur-Mer, and this was connected to Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer. To the east again is Langren-sur-Mer. Beater-Stansness are located at each of these sites, with bunker positions, ring stands and tobrukes that house machine guns, field guns, and anti-armour weapon systems. Juno Beach was separated into Mike and Nan sectors, which in turn was separated into Nan Red, Nan White, and Nan Green. Mike sector was separated into Mike Red and Mike Green. We are only going to look at the Nan sector. We will focus on A Company, commanded by Major Archie McNaughton, a 47-year-old veteran of World War I. This is an extract from the unit war diary. It reads, H hour was 0745 hours. A Company and B Company touched down at 0810 hours. Crossing the beach itself, only a few casualties occurred, but Lieutenant M. Keefe and several of his platoon became casualties in houses that had been booby-trapped. These houses were along the beach. Other than this, A Company reached the line of the beachhead by 0948 hours. Casualties numbering 24. We're currently on Juno Beach and we're walking along what's essentially a promenade between Saint-Aubin-sur-Mer and Bernières-sur-Mer, and we're looking for the location. Well, really the only existing landing footage taken on Juno Beach was filmed. It's really quite special footage, and there's a really poignant moment that perhaps I'll overlay onto this, where a young soldier looks around over his shoulder at perhaps a senior NCO or someone who's more senior, who just lays a comforting hand on his shoulder. And you can see probably an older soldier who's got a wedding band on. You can see that the soldier's absolutely terrified, and the soldier just puts a comforting hand on his shoulder. Now let's look at that amazing footage of A Company landing right here at Juno Beach on D-Day.
Lay me down in the cold, cold ground, where a foe many more have gone. Lay me down in the cold, cold ground.
So ignore that large building to the right. That building doesn't exist anymore. Directly over the doors, you can see the narrow 2-story building with a chimney on the right-hand side of the roof. This is our reference building. You can see the sea wall at the base of that, and forward of this, in the near ground, you can see a metal hedgehog on the shore. To the right of our reference building, you can see a smaller outbuilding, about half the size, and this is to be known as the garage. The North Shore New Brunswick Regiment landed on Nan's sector of Juno Beach near the town of St. Albans-sur-Mer. Despite heavy machine gun and mortar fire, the North Shore's A Company, led by the 47-year-old Major McNaughton, cleared the beachhead and met their first objective on time. The men then entered St. Albans-sur-Mer, where they cleared house by house. The landing craft you can see in this footage is called the LCA, Landing Craft Assault, and there were 142 which were used on Juno Beach alone. They only had 19mm of armour, and they could carry about 36 troops. And these were the same landing craft that were used at Dieppe. Now the next point is the soldier we identified in our footage. The soldier who looks over his shoulder with fear etched onto his face. It is generally accepted that he is Private George Baker, born on August 31st, 1923, on a small farm near North Brookfield in Nova Scotia. And we're going to look at what happened to him. That building right there is the reference house from our footage. So hopefully you can identify the chimney on the right of the roof. The house obviously has this extension on the front now, and it does look a lot different. But next door, you can see that smaller timber frame building reference garage. From the beach, you can see the two buildings and the imposing seawall from the view of the soldiers as they assaulted.
Right, well I think this is about as close as we're going to get it. And you can see there the house with that extension on the front now. But that's obviously the house from this picture. You can see the chimney on the right hand side. And you can see the timber framed sort of building to the right hand side, the smaller one.
And it was right here where those LCAs came ashore. Private George Baker was a brain gunner with A Company under the command of Major Archie McNaughton. Their landing craft doors opened and the men poured out under heavy fire. They scrambled over barriers and ran for the security of the sea wall. The war diary records that by 11:15, Hitler's Atlantic Wall had been broken. All company objectives had been achieved, and the North Shore Regiment was in control of St. Alban. George would live his life not knowing about this film. Following D-Day, the regiment pushed south. At some point, George was wounded by friendly fire when the Canadians were attacked by US bombers, but he recovered from his wounds to continue fighting. When the war ended, George returned to Canada. He enrolled in a vocational training school in North Sydney, where he completed a cabinet making course. While in school, George met Madge Edmonds. They fell in love and were married in the spring of 1947. George and Madge raised 5 children, but in 1959, Madge became ill and unfortunately died. She was only 39 years of age. George now struggled to manage his young family. When not working, he loved to spend time with his dogs, hunting, fishing, gardening, and watching the Toronto Blue Jays. He enjoyed his grandchildren and enjoyed showing them how he could unscramble Rubik's Cubes in only 90 seconds. He lived in North Brookfield all his life, and he rarely spoke about the war. George Herman Baker died on the 23rd of July 2003 at 79 years of age. He is buried in the Hillcrest Cemetery in Westfield, Nova Scotia. So let's look at the key differences between Juno and other beaches by looking at Widerstandsnest 27. This was a strongpoint connected by trenches that used houses and residential areas to enhance its lethality. The Tobruks would contain machine guns or mortars just like these along the sea wall. This is a really formidable position that even had tunnels to aid movement throughout the town. In this picture, you can see the trench system amongst ruined buildings. It looks more like a scene from Stalingrad than the D-Day beach invasion. So let's visit Nan Red Sector. This stretch of Normandy coast is beautiful. I love visiting, and I think they have a perfect balance of catering for tourism and respectfully honouring the events of 1944. This gun emplacement is probably my favourite in Normandy because it tells us so much about the German defender's mindset.
So this is WN27 behind me, and the really interesting thing is that there's no embrasure that faces out to sea. All of the firing ports are along the beach. And that's really important because these positions are interlocking, providing mutual supporting fires. If you had embrasures out to front, firing out to sea, you're going to hit the frontal armour of tanks, which isn't necessarily the best place to attack them. But what it also means is that you're open to naval gunfire and from fire support from the beach. This is a perfect example of how to provide flanking fire onto the beaches at Juno. So we're stood here at the seawall, St Aubin-sur-Mer, and the first thing that will strike you is that this is far more urbanised, certainly, than places like Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, which really was really rural. And as soon as they got off the beaches, they were straight into those fields and into the countryside. And the defences were actually built up within the houses. So the houses became strong points themselves. There were trenches connecting these strong points together as well. And they just became like mini citadels that had to be cleared by the Canadians and the British forces on Saw Beach. Right behind me you can see the sea wall, which is probably 8 to 12 foot now, but on D-Day it would have actually been even bigger because the sand has built up here to quite a big extent. So this was a really heavily defended area with a sea wall that the Canadians would have to get over as well, and on top of that sea wall was a bird's nest of barbed wire which made it incredibly difficult to get off. So finding an exit from this beach was the first priority for those Canadians who landed here on D-Day. So the other consideration is that this is, a lot more urbanised than the other beaches, like I said. And as a result, that meant the Allies were really hesitant to try and bomb it with strategic air bombing and with a great deal of naval gunfire support. What that means is that there's a lack of suppressive fires on this beach. And so the Allies relied quite heavily on the DD tanks, the much vaunted amphibious assault tanks that could land on this beach to provide that fire support. But unfortunately, they'd be delayed in landing because of a sandbar 200-300 metres off the shore, which meant they couldn't actually land and support the tanks with their integral fires. As a result, a bit like Dieppe, it was a frontal assault onto these positions without the integral support of the tanks, without strategic bombing, and without a lot of naval gunfire. So the final point to talk about is the enemy themselves. So the Germans who were garrisoned here were the 700th and 16th Static Defence Division. Contrary to popular belief, they were actually well-trained troops. They weren't the old granddads that some people make them out to be, and they definitely weren't elite forces either, but they were specially trained for defensive operations and, in fact, coastal defensive operations. So it made them well-suited to be here.
Let's now go to Nan White Sector and Widerstandsnest 28 at Bernier-sur-Mer. This is another one of those 50mm anti-tank guns that would fire down roads and along the beaches, targeting that flank armour of Allied tanks. You can see the dead and wounded Canadians sheltering behind this emplacement, the barrel still pointing along the beach here. German prisoners, perhaps even the crew of this gun, are sat on the beach with Canadian wounded behind them. This was the scene of some truly ferocious fighting. The enemy fortifications on Nan White Sector had been barely dented by the preliminary bombardment. The DD tanks were supposed to swim in ahead of the infantry to diminish the German resistance, but they were forced to land after them due to tides, waves, and the sandbank offshore. When the Queen's Own Rifles Regiment stormed the beaches, they received the worst battering of any Canadian unit on D-Day. Charlie Martin, who was the company sergeant major of A Company, described the landing in his book, Battle Diary. The moment the ramp came down, heavy machine gun fire broke out from somewhere behind the seawall. Mortars were dropping all over the beach. B Company landed directly in front of an enemy pillbox, which inflicted 65 casualties within the first few minutes. The assault depended on the resolve and courage of the remaining men to race across the beach to the seawall with no cover in between. In a mad dash, 3 riflemen reached this pillbox. Using their grenades and stun guns and firing through the slits, they managed to silence the defenders within. Lieutenant Herbert, Lance Corporal Tessier and Rifleman Chikos received medallic recognition for their attack on the main pillbox. The Queen's Own Rifles had the highest casualties among the Canadian regiments, with 143 killed, wounded or captured right here on this beach.
Okay, this concrete emplacement behind me is what's known as a Tobruk, and some Tobruks had machine guns in the top and some of them had pintle mounts for a mortar. In this case, it was a machine gun. Now, there's a picture that shows the Canadians on this beach stood next to this Tobruk, and it just goes to highlight how much the sand levels have risen, because it's probably a good 6 to 8 foot higher now than it was back then. The other really interesting feature is that in the top of this Tobruk was a 1908 style machine gun, and this is a water-cooled machine gun that would have been seen on the front lines in World War I. Nevertheless, still a really deadly weapon system, which goes to show that not every machine gun on the D-Day beaches was an MG42. So as we walk along the beaches and we get towards Canada House, you can see another one of these concrete machine gun emplacements called a Tobruk. And these were dotted at regular intervals all the way along the beach, and they would have provided a withering weight of fire onto the beaches here. You can see that it's got an unimpeded field of view all the way down towards Canada House, and then all the way down towards WN 28 just down there. This really is one of the best defended beaches in the D-Day sector.
Now Gold Beach with Stanley Hollis.
My company of Green Howards was one of the assault companies on D-Day. We had to take a coastal gun battery at Montfleury. I was in charge of a group of 2-inch mortars laying down smoke, but I noticed that 2 of our platoons running up to attack the guns had gone past a pillbox. I went along with my company commander, one of the bravest men I know. They fired at us, but once we were on top of the box, grenades and stem gun killed some of them, and when I went down inside with my stem gun, I got half a dozen prisoners.
Company Sergeant Major Stanley Hollis of the 6th Battalion, the Green Howards. This is his story in his own words. On the 6th of June 1944, under the command of General Eisenhower, the Allies broke into Europe. The US landing at Utah and Omaha beaches, the British landing at Gold and Sword, with the Canadians at Juno. Our story took place at Gold Beach. Now this is Gold Beach King Sector, and with this aerial photography we can see the bunker location which was assaulted by Stan Hollis on D-Day, as well as the gun position at Montfleury which they were ordered to seize. We will also look at this bigger map for reference, but our first location is the landing site on Gold Beach. Now this is Gold Beach King Sector, and this is where the 6th Battalion, the Green Howards, landed in the assault wave on D-Day. Now I've overlaid some original footage of the Tyne and Tees Division landing in the same location, coming ashore right after the assault wave.
Unless for the stone groins that you can see, the coastal erosion measures, the beach is pretty much unchanged from 1944. It's probably the beach with the fewest changes, where you can see how it actually appeared on D-Day. Now, as we look across to the eastern end of the beach here, you can see just off in the distance there, I'll try and zoom in, there is a concrete emplacement with the seaward facing arm protecting it from naval gunfire and the embrasure pointing towards us. Now that gun position is facing us, so any landing craft and any armoured vehicles that came ashore right here would have been under fire from that position. That position was responsible for knocking out a number of tanks and landing craft that came ashore right here. Now this beach and this particular sector is quite famous because it is where Stanley Hollis came ashore. Now Stanley Hollis is just one man within thousands that landed here on D-Day. But we're going to use Stanley Hollis as an example because we can actually trace where he landed, where he fought through, and which road he used to get off this beach. So follow me now as we retrace the route for Stanley Hollis.
Upon landing on the shores of France, Stan Hollis attacked what he thought was a machine gun position. So let's take a look at that position today.
So Stanley Hollis says that he saw a stripped down Lewis gun on the deck of his landing craft, and he decided to put it into use by using a full pan of ammunition to fire at what he believed was a pillbox. And when I show you the footage, you can see that this is one of the few buildings that were actually on this site at the time. So from a landing craft, you may well think that this building, this stone structure, is a pillbox. So a full magazine of ammunition was fired into this structure. Turns out it was just basically a station for a local small gauge railway or tram system, Victorian era, that was here, which ran along the road that you can see here. Now, hopefully you can see the change in the topography and the terrain by looking at this footage, and sometimes the light distorts it slightly. Hopefully you can see that those houses are much higher than where I am now. And that is the same ridgeline that covers Omaha Beach, essentially. It's just much more gradual. There's a slope rather than a bluff or a cliff like there is at Omaha Beach. But it's the same height difference, really. And it was here that Stanley Hollis charged up this road towards enemy positions, which effectively were lining the forward edge of where those houses are. Those houses, of course, weren't there in 1944, but they've been built on a similar sort of position.
I noticed that two of our platoons running up to attack the guns had gone past a pillbox. This was only about a foot above the ground, but I spotted a Spandau machine gun in the firing slit.
Now keep a lookout for this peculiarly shaped house, which you will see appear again very soon.
Now, if we overlay the images I'm showing you now with the footage from the 50th TNTs as they approach off the beach, headed up this road and beyond, you can see that it's still really open here, but there is far more in the way of shrubbery, trees, woodland, etc. And you can see just about where the line of that field boundary is, that's where the anti-tank ditch was, and they saw the locals probably around about here, those locals that they chatted to.
Now remember that house? Well, this is it on the bigger map, and here it is today.
The house that you can see in the footage is in fact this house. And this is the one with the circular shaped driveway on the aerial footage. The driveway doesn't necessarily exist anymore, but this is the house you can see in that video footage. And it sticks out like a sore thumb clearly on the footage because you can see it. But today there is this big wall here which protects it from being seen. So I'm just looking from the roadway, which I'm allowed to do. I'm not on their property. And it's interesting to think that this is a witness to that act by Stanley Hollis. People, if they were in that building, would have seen Stanley Hollis run up this road, run down this direction towards the bunkers and the German defences. Now, of course, none of these houses were here; these were all new. But this is essentially where those acts were taking place. I think it's brilliant.
Let's now look at the bunker location where it's believed Stanley Hollis assaulted, and he tells us what happened next.
I went along with my company commander, one of the bravest men I know. They fired at us, but once we were on top of the box, grenades and stem gun killed some of them, and when I went down inside with my stem gun, I got half a dozen prisoners. It was a big place, 2 stories deep, and we got all the equipment intact, so that made things just a little safer for the rest of our company in their attack.
Now, the observation bunker is just up here, and this is where Stanley Hollis jumped on top, threw a grenade through the slit, and cleared the position. And it's right here. This mound that you can see. This is it. Stanley Hollis stood on top of that and threw a grenade inside, fired his Sten gun through the embrasure, but it was where these houses were is where he came across. Now those houses of course weren't here at the time. I don't think you can get in here anymore, but you might be able to see inside still. Oh, the cat comes to say hello. Hello. We've got our observation post with feline friend, and that is the view they would have had. So they would have been able to coordinate the fires onto the beach easily on D-Day. And Stanley Hollis is the one who cleared this position. So we're in the footsteps of Stanley Hollis today. And we're coming up to the location where he achieved his second feat of heroism on D-Day, and this is in Crepon. The first act, of course, as you've just seen, was down just off Gold Beach near Montfleury. And now we're into Crepon.
The fighting all through D-Day was fairly warm, but one piece of trouble we ran into was on account of some dogs I noticed at the end of a country lane. There was nobody there, but the dogs were wagging their tails. When I went along with the Major, we found a German field gun supported by machine guns in a farmyard. Elements of D Company attacked from some farm buildings, but every time our lads got up on the next wall, they were knocked out by machine guns. I tried to get the gun crew with a mortar, but they started blazing away with a gun at 100 yards, open sights, and big stones were flying all over. The gun concentrated on one of our Bren groups, and things looked bad for them. They couldn't get back. So I tried again with a Bren, and this time the Boche got so worried, they left our lads alone, and we all got back safely. The field gun was taken later.
Now, every time I've come to Normandy, I've never been able to get into this orchard. The owner's either been out or I haven't been able to stop by because of time constraints with other filming commitments I've had. But on this occasion, the owner was in, and all I had to do was knock on the door, and they knew exactly what I was after. So it's right at the end of this orchard, just in that tree line that you can see beyond the fence, is where a gun was located. And that gun was pointing in the other direction initially, and that is why Stanley Hollis tried to engage them. But as he came around the corner, he saw two dogs, and the dogs' tails were wagging, indicating that they were probably near people. And sure enough, a shot rang out from this location and struck the wall behind Stanley Hollis, which is just behind me. He was just over here by that farm building. Now, that indicated to him clearly that there were likely enemy present. That is when he decided to get two Brens to come along with him. They were laying down suppressive fire as he crawled along the left-hand side of this this orchard here, in what was at the time a rhubarb patch. This was all like allotments, if you like. There was a rhubarb patch along here, and he crawled along the side up towards the gun position, and he fired a Piat, and unfortunately that Piat landed just short. It's got quite a parabolic shot because it's a spring-loaded projectile. It landed short and didn't knock out the gun. And what it meant for Stanley is that the gun knew that he was there and began to turn towards him. It actually began to face him, but they couldn't depress the gun enough so that the gun would engage him. It actually engaged over his head and struck into one of the walls here. It probably struck over there into that farm building. Stanley then extracted from this location, but what he didn't realise is that he left two men behind here. And so then he had to go back and recover them. So the way that he recovered them and ensured their withdrawal was to go in with a Bren gun, firing from the hips, suppressing that enemy position, allowing the the Allied soldiers to extract with him. Absolutely astounding, really, and it's amazing that I've got to come in here and be allowed access. It's brilliant.
Some days later, we had the hardest fighting the battalion has ever seen in the whole war. We had heavy losses. There again, another farmhouse held us up. Again, I was lucky with a stem gun. From 15 yards this time. It knocked out all the bush except one who came out of a trench, and I got him too. So we pushed on into France. Now these don't sound like VC affairs, and I don't know if they really are. I do know it was the sort of thing that was happening all over in the first 5 days in Normandy. And jumping into a pillbox full of Germans wasn't so wonderful when you saw your own lads fighting like heroes on every side of you. And when you saw lads you knew dropping dead, you wanted to do something to smash the guns that had done it. Just after we were out of the water on D-Day, I saw one lad go down, wounded. Now he saved my life in Sicily, and he comes from Middlesbrough too. That sort of thing makes you forget to be scared. I've always been scared when we've gone into action. With the BEF at Dunkirk, I'll remain to Sicily. But if your lads see their sergeant major's got his head down, well, it's a bad do, isn't it? So that's the way it goes. And things like snipers' bullets on your cheek, and being blown out of trenches, and looking into German gun muzzles, they don't count as much as you'd think when you've got men like that round you. I'd like them to know that their telegram was the first I got about the VC. I've sometimes heard that chaps who get medals inspire the other men. It wasn't like that in my case. My officers and men, they inspired me.
What a fitting memorial to Stanley Hollis and to the Green Howards behind me. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, I've got many more like it from Normandy, and I've put some links to them right above so you can check them out. Until next time.
A double tour of Omaha Beach.
lay me down in the cold, cold
Many people
ground.
have seen the D-Day landing footage from the Allied perspective, including footage just like this of machine gun fire raking across troops as they're coming to shore. And many people have seen the view looking up from the beach at the German defences. But in this video, I'm going to show you the trenches that the Germans use, the bunkers that they were firing from, and I will try to show you exactly what they saw on that fateful morning. You will literally be looking through
Many
their
men
eyes.
have gone.
Using expert mapping from my friend Michael Ackerman, we explore 3 strongpoints and I take you inside a previously believed to be inaccessible bunker. So stick around to find out exactly who or what we found inside.
In the cold, cold ground, wherefore
Hello.
many men have gone.
Raptor, this is Steel Ray. Adjust fire system aided. Out.
Omaha Beach is a 5-mile-long crescent beach separated by Allied planners into landing beach sectors. It also had 5 natural beach exits, but unsurprisingly, the German strongpoints protected these exits. Now, I'm going to take you to strongpoint 60 in the east, 62 in the center near Easy Red and Fox Green sectors, and I'm going to take you to Widerstandsnest 71 overlooking Dog Green sector. Now, this is Widerstandsnest 71, a D1 Wehrville draw, and we'll start to the east of the position. I wanted to show you this view first so you could see the elevation of Widerstandsnest 71 above Omaha Beach. Now, many people are also surprised at the buildings that are lined along the beachfront, some of which are actually contemporary to 1944, and they're also fortified by the Germans. Another factor I want to talk about is the crescent-shaped bay at Omaha Beach, which allowed for flanking fire from the heights across the beach, enfilading fire. Now here I'm actually traversing the trench positions which existed along the bluffs. And here you can just picture the Germans looking down from this vantage point. Not only did the soldiers have to cross this open beach, they also had to make their way up these heights. And just look how steep these defenses are.
This is probably the type of defense that most people envisage when they think about Omaha Beach, remembering back to those opening scenes from Saving Private Ryan, which became so iconic. So let's get into the position itself. First, we're going to check out a Tobruk, which houses an MG-34. So here's Tobruk at Widerstandsnest 71. You've seen loads of these before on my channel, but it's always worth checking them out. And there's the recess. Right on top of the cliff. So we've seen a fighting position, but where did they sleep? This is a Feldmasse used as a shelter. They didn't necessarily sleep here unless the invasion was deemed imminent. But inside here they had a water tank and a boiler or a pressure oven. It seems set low to the ground. That's because it had the trenches connecting it from here to the fighting positions. One of those trenches led right here, looking down onto the beach. So next we're going to look at something really quite special. This is a double embrasure machine gun position, which covered the approach on the D1 Veerville draw. So still at Widerstandsnest 71, that double machine gun embrasure is down here. And we'll try and make our way down. Hello. Someone's bed. German view. Not the easiest place to get into, but someone has left a bed here, which has probably been there a while. So this is the way in and the way out, obviously, only one way in, one way out, and it's full of all the leaves, twigs, rocks, etc., mud that's fallen in here over the last 80 years or so. And now I'm going to try and get back out. As you get around the corner, it's actually really dark. Try and get out. And the gap is only this big, which you pretty much have to crawl through. I wouldn't advise it, but it is good fun. And don't wear your Sunday best down here. I want to show you exactly how inaccessible this position is. We're down here on the D1 draw now. The beach is just down there. But this is where the position is located. It's an old quarry.
And these pictures are fantastic to show you what it looked like on D-Day, but also how it looks now because they actually excavated lots of stone away from this position. And this is one more Tobruk I want to show you.
Still on top of Widerstandsnest 71, and there's another Tobruk covering the rear of the position as well. You can see how far away this one is from the actual cliff. Welcome to Omaha Beach on the Normandy coast, famous as one of the 2 US landing beaches used during D-Day. In this video, I take you to locations along the whole length of Omaha Beach, and I share with you some of my favourite then and now photos. I show you the picture I'm most proud of right at the end, so be sure to stick around for that one. Now, Omaha Beach is approximately 6 kilometres long. It's mostly rural countryside, punctuated by small hamlets and villages. The landing beach was separated into sectors, as you can see here. Now, I'm going to take you to Omaha Beach on your own private tour, but first we're going to stop off at a town on the way. So I'm here in the beautiful little town of Trevier, which isn't actually in the Omaha vicinity, it's just inland, but it's a really brilliant picture that I wanted to share with you. So in this picture you can see a dead German who's lying on the floor pretty much in front of us. I need to crouch down a bit just to make sure we get the perspective correct. And make sure we also capture the building. So I think we've got it there. And it is quite a shocking photo. YouTube sometimes demonetizes or bans videos for showing bodies, etc. So we'll see what happens with this one. We're just going to make our way over to this picture here. Now this is the American forces who came through here, who have just liberated the town. It's a really brilliant picture, and in the top corner here you can see this archway next to this white building, and if I turn around you can see that same archway over there. Now I've never actually seen that picture before, so I haven't prepared to do a then and now for this one. But you can see that the picture would have been taken from behind me where that archway is, with the building to the left hand side, which was showing up as white in the black and white picture. But again, really brilliant picture. Isn't that fantastic? Now I'm going to head to Omaha Beach. I've got many pictures I want to share with you, and hopefully you're going to really enjoy this episode. Our next stop is to Widerstandsnest 60, and this formidable strong point overlooked the Cabell Draw and the eastern end of Omaha Beach. Okay, let me know what you think. This is a picture of some German defenders who are on Widerstandsnest 60, and you can see that they're surveying the ground. They're pointing actually to the east, but I'm facing now more to the north and the west. And you can see that they were surveying the ground. You've got the curvature of the bay there. This is a crescent-shaped bay at Omaha Beach, which actually helped the defenders. And I think you can see that we've just about lined that up well enough. Now, what's really nice this time of year, I love coming in the summer, although it is much busier, is that you get all of these lovely wildflowers and the grass is growing really long, which makes it really nice. I've come here in the winter as well, and it's just a little bit bleak, and you can obviously never guarantee the weather. So I love coming at this time of year. But walking through this is lovely. I wonder if they have adders in Normandy. And of course, the other great thing about Widerstandsnest 60 is that the trenches are really well preserved, and some of the defensive positions are superbly preserved as well. So it genuinely is one of my favourite places to come. And I'll just show you the trenches now. You see that they zigzag off into the distance that way, but I think the best section is actually back over here. You can see Omaha Beach down there in the bottom. That's where we're going to head shortly. I'm going to show you some of my favourite then and now pictures from down there. But look at this part of the trench system, zigzagging away. I've got some other then and now pictures I normally take here as well, but I'm not going to do that today. Otherwise this episode will be an hour long. Unless you want it to be an hour long, let me know in the comments and I'll make one in the future maybe. But look at those zigzag trench position. Isn't that cool? So we're here at the base of Widerstandsnest 60 on Fox Green sector, and I'm going to try and show you some then and now pictures of the soldiers who were wounded at the base of these bluffs. Some really impressive pictures, and hopefully we can match them up and do them justice.
Now, this footage was actually taken on D-Day as soldiers from the 116th Infantry Regiment landed on the beach. This footage was taken by Sergeant Taylor of the 165th Signals Photo Company. He was wounded in the arm as he came ashore right here on the Fox Green sector, but he managed to make it to the cover of the cliffs, and he continued to film troops as they arrived.
Right, so we've just climbed down from the bluffs. We're now on the beach, looking at the cliffs at the base of Widerstandsnest 60, and we're going to try and match up some then and now pictures from here.
Now, these are some of the stills pictures taken by Sergeant Taylor showing injured American troops sheltering right here by these cliffs.
Now, we're never going to be able to match this perfectly because of all the erosion. You can see how much the cliffs have washed away. But we're going to find a piece of the cliff that looks very similar to the ones taken in the pictures. And we'll try and do some comparisons that way. Now, lots of people think that the tide was really far out on D-Day, and it was when the invasion actually started. So when the landing craft started approaching the beach, the tide was out. They had to run in. However, the tide quickly came in, and there's some footage I'm going to show you now which shows the tide lapping up to these small cliffs here. And the soldiers found that the space they had available was gradually decreasing all the time, so they had to keep moving up to the bluffs. And actually the bluffs is where they were most protected anyway, so that's where they would naturally be.
Our next location is inland at Courville-sur-Mer. These next pictures are pretty well known, but they're really excellent because so little of the environment around them has changed.
So I'm stood in the road here, which is never a good place to be, with oncoming traffic. On this side of the road, this is the first picture I want to show you. And you can see actually that gate there, which looks as though it's rusted and fallen off, is actually the same one that was in the picture. And again, the second one is taken from in the road as well. So I'm going to stand in the middle of the road now, and there's a car coming. Hopefully you can see that that is lined up about there. Sorry it's not perfect, I'm in the road, and there's a car coming right now. Not quite the right angle, but there is a sign now in the way. This one right here, this is where the picture would have been taken from. So it would have been taken like this. Which is a bit frustrating. Alright, I think we've got that. Let's see if we can line it up. Now the church took quite a lot of damage during World War II, and the spire was actually destroyed and rebuilt. You can see there's some damage still on the building, but we're going to have a look at quite a well-known then and now picture. I've done it a couple of times before. I know lots of other people have come here and done it before. It's a really nice picture actually. So let's try and do it. You can't miss it because there's a great big picture here, exactly the same one that I'm gonna do right now. So we're almost in the right location anyway. Pretty much a little bit closer. This is awesome. I might carry around huge print-offs of the pictures and do it in the future because I can now just compare it. Let's overlay that and see how we do.
Now we look at Widerstands Nest 65 covering the E1 exit and its casemate that housed the formidable Pak-38, a 50mm anti-tank gun. Now this gun would have been responsible for the destruction or indeed the immobilisation of a number of vehicles and landing craft on D-Day. The position where this footage was taken is now barricaded off to prevent damage to the grass from all the tourists, so I couldn't actually line this one up unfortunately, but the rules are the rules and we must be respectful. Hopefully you can still see where this footage was taken. Now this R667 casemate was actually only finished in April of 1944, so it was still really new on D-Day. Supporting this position were two Tobruks that contained mortars, and there was a 75mm field gun slightly further up the valley. This area has changed quite a lot. There used to be an anti-tank ditch here, there was lots of wire, there was minefields, and they've all gone, leaving little traces of the defences, but there are still some positions where you can see the trench system that was here, if you know where to look. Now, this bunker was attacked on D-Day by the USS Frankfurt. However, in the end, it's believed that it was either a Sherman tank or indeed 37mm guns of a AAA half-track that forced the gun to be silenced. It's claimed that Sergeant Haas of the 467th AAA Weapons Battalion destroyed the gun. In doing so, 20 Germans surrendered and the beach exit was opened. Thousands of US troops would pass by this position, now used as a US headquarters, as they poured inland and continued the fight. Next, we head to Easy Red sector, not far from the formidable Widerstandsnest 62.
Now walking along Omaha Beach itself, and there are people enjoying themselves on the beach. There are people swimming. There are the usual tours that you'll see coming along to see this location. It's not quite summer season yet, but it's getting there, so it's quite busy. And I've seen some comments on previous videos I've made where people have said that people shouldn't be celebrating or enjoying themselves on these beaches. They should be hollowed ground and protected, if you like. And I can understand the sentiment. I can see where people are coming from, but surely the whole reason why they came to liberate these beaches in this country was so that people could enjoy themselves and enjoy their liberties. Now, the next location we are going to have a look at is the very first US cemetery that appeared on Omaha Beach.
On June the 8th, 1944, the 607th Quartermaster's Grave Registration Company established the temporary cemetery on this site. After the war, the present-day cemetery was established a short distance away on the bluffs near this position, and the bodies were removed. We now move further along the beach to Dog Green sector, a really terrible place to be on D-Day. This is Widerstandsnest 72, part of Strongpoint Veerville, and inside this bunker was the powerful Pack 88. One of the principles of defence is mutual support, and it's no surprise that this position was flanked by Widerstandsnest 71 and Widerstandsnest 73, each bristling with their weapon systems aiming out to sea and also along the beach. And if we look at the line of sight for this position, you can see that it's positioned perfectly to provide that flanking fire into any landing craft or tanks as they came ashore. If ever there was a location on Omaha Beach where the invasion had stalled, it was right here. I won't go into too much detail on this strong point, as I have a couple of videos coming up on Omaha Beach where we look specifically at the strong points. But there are some interesting then and now photos that we can do right here.
And another windows over there.
Now, this picture of a child looks quite sad, but it's actually taken after the war, and I have to thank Michael Ackerman for sharing these pictures with me. Still at Widerstandsnest 72, we look at another embrasure which is just slightly further along the beach. And again, this position had commanding views along the length of the beach. They were really well sighted. Finally, we head to the location of the then and now picture that I'm most proud of. I think it's just a fantastic picture. We walk up this track on the far western end of Omaha Beach and we head towards Widerstandsnest 73. Now this track is not original. It wasn't there during World War II. It was added later. But you can see the casemate in the cliffside right here. Now this rudimentary looking casemate housed a 75mm PaK 98, another one of those armour-piercing anti-tank guns that fired on a rigid trajectory, high velocity along the beach. And just look at that. I really love this picture. It's a one-of-a-kind casemate. I don't think there's any more like this. I actually think it was not built to a set design. It has a strange muzzle brake on the gun that I haven't really seen on any other designs. And I just think the gun is perfectly sighted. Just look at those views along the beach. Now, unfortunately for this gun, it looks quite obvious. You can see this position, so it would have been struck prior to H hour. So the gun was probably silenced and probably didn't actually get to cause as much damage as it could have done. But it's so well sighted here, it's just not particularly well camouflaged. And that is my favourite photo from Omaha Beach. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments below if you did. I genuinely read all of the comments. Equally, if you've got any recommendations for me or if you've got any ways that you think I can improve on these videos, please let me know. And the point that I really want to end on is a thought that I always have when I come here to Normandy, but also specifically to Omaha Beach. And that is a thought about those brave men who would have been standing on those landing craft with the doors about to go down. They must have been terrified as they stormed these beaches. So we must always remember their sacrifice and what they were fighting for. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time. So let's go to Widerstandsnest 62, a defensive strongpoint perfectly sited on this prominent outcrop and able to fire on a large portion of the beach. It was sited to fire onto Easy Red Sector and the E3 exit. So let's start off at the rear of the position at the Wehrmacht shelter. German soldiers needed shelter close to their fighting positions, and so this is where they stayed. Down these steep steps, we come to two rooms. The first was used as accommodation for 3 company of 726 Regiment. Living in this bunker up to D-Day was Soldat Drews, Lehrman, Plotter, Selbach, Corporal Kriefworth, who was 35 years old, and Franz Gockel, who was 18 years old. Now Franz Gockel, seen here, used a Polish MG08 water-cooled machine gun on D-Day. It's strange to think we know who lived in this bunker and that an 18-year-old in Franz Gockel was responsible for the death of so many young men who landed on the beaches barely 400 meters away. Next, we go to my favorite location at Widerstandsnest 62, and that is the observation post.
So this is one of the observation positions used to call in indirect fire onto the beach that day. And from here you'd be able to coordinate fires from the artillery inland, the numerous batteries which were inland, but also the mortar positions just behind us as well. And so this would have been relatively well rehearsed. They would have coordinated fires onto this position. But ammunition was always going to be the issue. And it was that case on D-Day as well, where they ran out of ammunition relatively quickly.
This was the command post used to communicate with the gun batteries in the rear at Pittsville.
And so can you imagine the troops in there having to race out and then make their way through these trenches down towards their fighting positions? So let's see if we can do that.
Imagine running back and forth while all this time you're under aerial and naval bombardment. Well, Bernard Frerking, who was at this position as the forward observation officer, was killed right here on D-Day. Next up, we see the large gun casemates. This is the R669. There were 2 of them on this position.
Now making our way to the second gun position here at Widerstandsnest 62. We'll go and see what life would have been like for the Germans in here. Again, lots of damage on the inside of there. It's from tanks firing inside from down onto the beach. Not from naval gunfire. People sometimes say this is from naval gunfire, the damage just there. But it's not. Now, unfortunately, this is, as you can see, flooded. I've come here in the winter, so we're going to go around the other side. Now we're going to climb down here without falling on our ass. Hopefully. You get this amazing view of the embrasure here. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. You can see the damage that it's taken on the lip of the embrasure there, and also on the seaward facing arm. And this arm obviously protects the gun from naval gunfire, but it didn't protect it from the tanks down on the beach. So those that did land, and yes, tanks did land on Omaha Beach, they fired up into the embrasures to silence it, because they could see them from the beach. And you can see right in there, loads of damage. So what would it have been like for a German gun detachment in here? Well, first and foremost, they would have been firing like 10 men straight down onto the beach in that direction. They wouldn't have been firing out to sea. They fire along the beach. And most people understand that. This position would have been bombed prior to D-Day, and it would have been bombed on the morning of D-Day. But there wasn't a great deal of damage that was inflicted by the aerial bombardment. It would have also been shelled by naval gunfire, and we know that this gun was still firing on H-hour when they actually landed on D-Day. So the naval gunfire wasn't entirely effective either, although believe me, I would not have liked to have been in here when this place is being hit in and around this area with naval gunfire. The Germans in here probably would have wanted to expend their ammunition and then withdraw, because there is nothing wrong with withdrawing once you've expended your ammunition. But their ammunition really would have been expended quite quickly, I suspect, because there just wasn't that much to go around. If you're defending everywhere along this frontage, then you really defend nowhere, and ammunition would have been in relative short supply. So believe me, they would have done some damage on the beach. The gun in here would have done some damage in the beach. But I suspect they would have run out of ammunition relatively quickly.
Corporal Lehrman, Hans Selbach and Emils Drews were the gun crews behind this bunker crewing the 75mm gun. Now the second casemate, which is just like this one, thankfully never had a gun installed in time for D-Day, so we don't believe it was firing.
And here's a view of that seaward facing protective arm to protect it from naval gunfire, and you can see a great big gouge has been taken out by fire that's come from behind me, which indicates that it's come from either down on the beach, most likely, or the sea. But you can see it's gouged that big shape right out of here. which is quite impressive because this stuff is pretty thick. It's pretty strong, as you can see that it's supported by steel inside. You can just see the damage that's happened there. Outstanding.
We will finish our tour at Widerstandsnest 60 on the far eastern side of Omaha Beach. Unique thing about Widerstandsnest 60 is the well-preserved trenches that you can still walk in today and the well-defended fighting positions on top of this outcrop.
So this video is all about D-Day from the German perspective. So let's go and see where the Germans stayed, what they were doing. So this is obviously a Tobruk, and this one has a pintle mount here, either for a mortar, very likely. It could be for a machine gun. And you can see where it would have been mounted on top there. And this is ammunition recess, which still got wood from 1944 in there. So this would have had ammunition stowed in there, which I think's pretty strange looking in there actually. Step for the German to get up on, so that they could look out of the Tobruk. Now, we're at Widerstandsnest 60, as I've already said, and this position was bombarded on D-Day. So the Germans would have been presumably taking cover in here and inside the Tobruk as this position was being shelled and bombed. But the thing I love about coming into here is the wood pattern that you can see there. Hopefully that's come out quite clear. Well, that shows that the shuttering that they used to pour concrete in here and build these structures has left the imprint against the concrete. Follow the line of the trenches now. And nothing really gives you a feel for the perspective from the Germans than the trenches that they would have dug by hand to provide themselves with protection. Now the good thing about coming in the end of the winter, start of the spring, is that the grass isn't quite long enough to cover up these trenches. I've been back here in the summer, and the grass is just too long. So let's have a look at another area that the Germans occupied. It shows you the positions that they would have used to fire down onto the beach. This is obviously ammunition storage in here as well. And these trenches were looking right down onto the beach. This is the view Germans would have had from Widerstandsnest 60 down onto the Americans as they landed on that beach. So if that doesn't give you a view of Omaha Beach from a German perspective, I don't know what will. Another Tobruk with the entrance quite eroded away. You can see how it was all protected. Daughter's laughing at me. And again, another Tobruk, like I said. And what I love looking at is the shape left by the shuttering. It's almost like the wood has left an imprint that lasts for a long time. There's more wood in here. Looks like that's been burnt away. Mad to think on D-Day, hands would have gone in there to grab ammunition and put them up into this firing platform. They're following the trenches all the way around to the other side of the position. Again, you can see the crescent-shaped bay of Omaha Beach in the background. And we're going into one of the other positions now. Trenches leading their way to it. You just imagine Germans sprinting down here as they're under fire. Going into this bunker position.
Now, this large room was not believed to be accommodation due to the lack of wall hangings that you can see for beds on the walls. Instead, it's believed that it was either for ammunition storage or for supplies. Now, interestingly, when this position was finally captured, there were 30 Germans who were taken as prisoners of war, and many of them were actually found inside this room and inside these corridors, hiding from the advancing American troops and, of course, the incessant bombardment. We're now going to head off the top of this position and onto the forward slopes which face the F1 draw and the Fox Green and Fox Red sectors. And this is where the 116th Infantry Regiment of the 29th Infantry Division landed, and this was during the initial assault waves. It was from these forward positions that lots of German fire poured into the Americans as they landed ashore, and they caused lots of casualties on D-Day.
A lot of people, when they come to Widerstandsnest 60, miss out on going down to one of the old gun positions down here. As the sun comes out and the wind is blocked by the lee of the hill here, it should be okay. So this is an old shelter, and there was a 75mm gun just forward of here, so pretty much just here-ish. None of this vegetation was here on D-Day. It was really bare, and that enabled obviously for clear fields of view, fields of fire for the Germans down onto the beach and across the beach.
Now, this 75mm gun was knocked out on D-Day, very likely by naval bombardment from the destroyers, but also it could have been by tanks which landed on Fox Green sector, and they were directed by Lieutenant Monteith. If you look closely at these pictures of the gun taken after D-Day, you can see that there are war trophy markings on the glacis, marking how many tanks they destroyed. Now, this gun had very likely seen action elsewhere before being brought into this position.
I've seen lots of maps where it shows a tunnel. I'm not sure how far exactly it went, but it wasn't particularly far. But this would have provided lots of protection for the Germans here as they come out and crew the crew the artillery piece that was, like I said, around about here, and fire down onto that section of the beach. They've actually cleared away all of this growth here, which gives a bit more of a true representation of what it actually was like on D-Day, and it allows visitors to see down onto the beach, where before the bushes were really quite high and the trees were quite high. It was obscuring the view, and now they've cleared all this away, which is awesome. Not sure how quickly those gorse will grow back, but it also allows you to see positions that were previously hidden. So every other time I've come here, for example, I've never realised there was another lower set of trenches that ran just below the ones I've shown you before. So there's another set of trenches here that runs parallel, which is pretty cool. And if we go further down, I think there's another set down here.
And finally, Utah Beach.
This is Robert St. John in the NBC newsroom in New York. Ladies and gentlemen, we may be approaching a fateful hour. All night long, bulletins have been pouring in from Berlin, claiming that D-Day is here, claiming that the invasion of Western Europe has begun. British-American landing operations against the western coast of Europe from the sea and from the air are stretching over the entire area between Cherbourg and the Hound, a distance of about 60 miles. I repeat, there is no confirmation. This is a command of General Eisenhower. Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Utah Beach. The time is 06:30 hours, which is obviously iconic because that is when the invasions were starting to take place all along this coastline. Now in this video, we're going to take you to Widerstandsnest number 10, which is a really important place because it's so well preserved today. And we're going to use Widerstandsnest 10 to show you how the German occupiers used to live and how they would have defended this area. So we're going to be crawling inside bunkers and we're going to be taking a look at all of the defenses in this area. Now hopefully if I pan around, you can see that the sun is rising. It looks absolutely beautiful, so we should get some lovely footage this morning. And I really hope you enjoy this video. If you do enjoy it, like the video and leave me a comment in the comment section below. Okay, we're heading up over the sand dunes now onto the beach. And if you were German in 1944, June the 6th, this place would have been full of Allied shipping. The time now is bang on 06:30. Just look at that, we've got the beach to ourselves. Absolutely empty.
If we look at Utah Beach, you can see the intended landing locations for the 4th Infantry Division here, marked Uncle Red and Tear Green. But due to a number of factors, including tidal drift, the landings actually took place further to the left on this map, which is to the east. This meant the landings took place further away from WN10. In this video, I'll show you why that turned out to be a really good thing for the US 4th Infantry Division. The formidable weapon system sighted here at Widerstandsnest 10 would have fired right into the flank of the advancing Allied armour and landing crafts. So let's take a look at the actual strong point itself. Using this satellite imagery, you can see the prepared positions here in yellow. We will visit all of these positions in this video. I've also highlighted the accommodation and the administrative buildings here in blue. They include things such as the garage, but also the shelters. The red lines here are barbed wire belts and minefields, and the black lines are the original trenches which have long since vanished.
Okay, well, the first position we're going to look at is one of the original structures that was built here. And you can tell this is an older structure because the concrete is not as thick. The concrete is actually really quite thin. Now, as we look a little closer, you can see that the structure itself has got a cold joint for a reinforcing arm. So these blast walls, which are on the side here, were to protect the emplacement from fire from the sea, naval gunfire. If I just swing around, you can see that the sea is obviously there to the right of this position, and this blast wall here is to protect it from naval gunfire.
So today this aperture points harmlessly up into the air due to the erosion, but in 1944 it pointed along the beach. The weapon system inside looked just like this, a 4.7 Pak 36. A Czech anti-tank gun which was produced by Skoda. The gun had a muzzle velocity of almost 800 meters per second and a max range of 4 kilometers, an incredibly powerful weapon system.
So this is a comparatively newer bunker which was built onto the position. So you can see it's much more squat, the profile is lower, and this blast wall is built into the structure, which gives it that added strength. Just look at all the damage this has taken. I wasn't going to look at the blast damage to start with, but just can't help myself. Look at all this damage here. You can see all the reinforced steel in there holding this structure together. And just look at that. That is 100% from a 75mm. And in fact, there's actually some shell still inside.
At this second position, we can see the aperture for the same type of weapon system, another anti-armor weapon system which provided flanking fire down the beach. Now, this type of weapon system was attached to the aperture in the configuration that you can see here. Now, what I love about this position is that the steps still exist on the side of this bunker. Often these are usually bent over because they've been vandalized or damaged over time.
Right, so I just wanted to touch on some of the concealment for this position. So clearly survivability in a fixed position is absolutely key. And from the air, these huge structures are very prominent. They're very easy to identify. So what the Germans used to do is cover elements of them in bitumen paint to try and disrupt the pattern. So this obviously looks like a great big cube from the air. And so you can see here that a good portion of it has been painted with black bitumen. Perhaps that's to make it look like a sloping roof or to make it look like a farm building, whatever it may be. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure that it worked for this position because they didn't attack here and they avoided it because it was such a strong position. But this black paint that you can see here sort of shows perfectly just how they did try and cover these positions. And also what's missing today is all the camouflage which was on these positions as well, which has clearly now been removed. But hopefully that gives you a feel for the mindset of the individuals who were based here and how they generally try to prevent themselves from becoming targets. So the first thing to talk about with this position is that it's a much larger concrete defensive position, really well built, really substantial piece of concrete here. And it's got scarring on the front. So this damage on the front of this position is very likely caused by naval gunfire. This is probably 8-inch shells perhaps that have hit this, and you can see they haven't really caused that much damage. Don't get me wrong, on the inside this would have felt like absolute hell when it's being struck, but it hasn't defeated or penetrated the structure. So that's really important to consider. And when we look slightly further along, we can see later damage from when they tried to attack this position. And you can see here, that is without a shadow of a doubt, 75mm tank round damage. And if I look across, sort of straight behind me, you can see the direction that that round came from. So that round would have come from down the beach or along the sand dunes perhaps, when the Allies were clearing up this position. So they'd already landed further down the beach, and they came back this way to clear this position. And there again, if I look slightly higher up onto the structure, you can see more damage which has come from the seaward side, and those would have been caused by 8-inch shells, predominantly from naval gunfire. Okay, so we're standing on Utah Beach, outside one of the more formidable positions on Utah Beach, and it wasn't even attacked on D-Day. This was actually bypassed. They landed somewhere else, and they flanked along the beach with armour and infantry to attack this position. So it just goes to show the crust of the Atlantic Wall wasn't necessarily as effective as people make it out to be. In fact, what Hitler described his approach as was the crust of the Atlantic Wall, the cushion of the inland areas and the marsh areas, and then the hammer, which would have been his armoured formations being surged in to push the Allies back into the sea. So the crust, the cushion, and then the hammer. Okay then, let's look at the embrasure itself. So you can see here really perfectly how this embrasure was protected by that flanking blast arm, which means that the naval gunfire didn't strike into this position. And you can see that the gun is firing down towards the beach. Now, really interestingly for this location, hopefully you can just see it in the distance there, is this sort of headland over there. The sea arcs around, so it's almost like Omaha Beach, where it's in a crescent shape. And the weapon system that they had here was capable of lobbing projectiles about probably 7 to 8 kilometers, which means that actually this gun position could have struck Allies if they were landing over there on the other beach, on the other end of the crescent there. Right, my favorite part, let's go and look at where the artillery pieces would have been. Right, well, let's look at this fantastic position here and have a look at some of the damage that it's sustained. So if we look here, you can see all of the scarring from small arms, and more importantly, you can see scarring here from whatever this projectile was, very likely from a tank shell, is still embedded in the concrete there. And as you look along the front of the embrasure, much more damage again. And you can see another scab there from a tank impact. The direction of that one looks as though it was coming slightly more from down to the beach. Let's just go and take a closer look. How amazing is that? So perhaps even more perfectly, this shows exactly what the field of fire was like for that gun position. And of course, things move ever so slightly over the years, but you can see that this gun, realistically, it could traverse probably no further than this. So straight down to the beach. And it could traverse easily to cover the headland over there as well. Now the gun that was actually in here, I'll overlay a picture of it, was an artillery piece, as I said before. It wasn't really a direct fire weapon system, although it could be used in that role. And it predominantly would have been firing high explosive projectiles. That indicates that it's more useful against things like infantry, landing craft, disruption attacks, etc. It's not necessarily designed to destroy tanks, although it absolutely could do that. And I'll have to check to see if that could be used to fire armor-piercing projectiles. But the weapon system here, even though it's old and obsolete, is still a formidable weapon system. Now it's quite dark in here, hopefully you can make this out. But this says Jeder Zeit, and this has been scribbled out, so unfortunately I can't see what that says here, but it begins with F. And jederzeit basically means like always ready. Always ready or always able, I think. So what I think that means is probably always ready to fire or always able to fire or fires first time, something like that. But that's really interesting to see original German graffiti, which is unfortunately underneath a lot of modern graffiti, and someone has scrubbed out this part right here. If anyone knows exactly what that said, please let me know in the comments. And at the rear of the gun position you have where the trails would have been, and the trails are the arms or the legs that come off the gun platform itself. And they've put these grooves in here either to prevent recoil or to help with recoil, or perhaps it's just to easily position the gun more. Either way, you can see them right here.
Now, this contemporary graffiti combined with walking around the locations and seeing the same views that they would have seen in 1944 really brings this position and the mindset of the defenders to life.
We're now walking along the area just behind the sand dunes, and this is like the accommodation and living area for the troops who were stationed here. Now, there's a number of buildings. Some of them are for storage, some of them are just actually accommodation buildings. There's a number of defensive positions here as well, and these would principally have been machine gun fixed positions and mortar to brooks, and the mortars could have fired about 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers, but they would have provided that indirect fire support for this position. Just as we're walking to the rear positions, I'll explain a little bit about the troops that were based here. So it was the 709th Division who were actually moved here in 1942, and they were reinforced by the 919th Regiment to defend this area. And this very specific area of about 4 kilometers of coastline was actually allocated to only one company, the 4th Company. So that's a hell of a lot of land to cover. So you can see it wasn't particularly well defended in terms of personnel. That means probably about 20 or 30 people were actually here defending this location. But what they lacked in manpower, they made up for in the fortifications here. So they put a few people in very well defended locations, as you can see. So let's have a look around some of these buildings that you can see in the rear position. Now you can see 2 large constructions here towards the back of the position, and one of them has clearly suffered some damage. Now, what used to happen after the war when farmers were trying to reclaim the land and just get on with their lives, they would try and blow these structures up. They would try and use a bit of dynamite or try and pull it over, whatever it may be, to just try and reclaim back the land, quite frankly. So it's not clear to me if this was caused by Allied damage on D-Day and thereafter, or whether this was caused after the war by the farmer reclaiming the land back. If you know different and you know what happened here, please let me know in the comments. I would genuinely love to know. It's years that I've been coming here and never known, so I genuinely would like to know. I think personally this was destroyed by the farmer and then just realised that it's far too costly in terms of explosives, but also in effort to try and get rid of it. We're now going to head over then to one of my favourite positions in all of Normandy. It's definitely up there in the top 10 because it appears to be so well constructed. Again, you can see this shutter forming on the outside here, those horizontal lines, indicating that it was built slightly earlier and indicating that it's slightly higher quality. Okay, so we've got the position there to mount a mortar on there, and that would have had an 8 centimetre German mortar on there, range of about 2 to 3 kilometres probably, no more than that. And then we've got a second embrasure off to the right here, which is where they would have had either room for someone to stand in there and provide local fire support just with their small arms, or they could have had a mount in there for a machine gun. There's no mount in there, so I can't say that for definite. Now, what I absolutely love about this position and why it's one of my favourite is that it's got bearing markings on the internal structure in here. And this is purely if they're given directions for a fire mission, the mortarmen could know exactly which bearing they had to be at, and this W is indicating west. And this is all in mils. Now, people do come in here with compasses and trying to assess if this is accurate or not. Is it still correct, or did they just get it wrong? And what they forget is that right underneath me is a big metal plate, and they're surrounded by reinforced steel inside here. That reinforced steel will throw off your compass. It is no different than if you were in a tank trying to take a compass bearing. It's next to useless. So the bearings that were inside here, you would assume must be correct, because the Germans would have known that too. They would not have put bearing markings on the wall that are being influenced by the metal inside this structure. So now standing on the top of that mortar position, and you can see here the much wider embrasure for the mortar. Would have been an 8cm mortar in here. You can see inside there where the pintle mount was, and you should just be able to make out the niches for the ammunition as well inside there. But off to the side, off to the flank, you can see a much smaller embrasure, and that was for someone to be stood here with their small arms, or they would have had a mount in here for a machine gun. And you can see the field of view that this position would have had. I just want to give you an overview of this position. So the very large bunker that we went in that had the artillery piece in there is in the far ground, sort of center screen now. And as we come back from that position, this is into the dead ground. So where I'm stood is behind the gun position, and the sea is beyond those sand dunes, that lip of land that you can see just off there, just in the distance there. Now, all along that high feature is Tobruks that would have had machine guns in them firing down onto the beach. So they were direct fire weapon systems down onto the beach. And we'll go and take a look at those. As we pan around to the right, and the light is really bright now, it's just at the very wrong angle where it's going to blow out my my footage, because the sun's now starting to rise. It's about 7:30 in the morning. Those were the gun positions there, which are aiming down onto the beach. You can just see them. I'm not going to pan around too much further because it's too bright. They're the gun positions that were firing down onto the beach, but along the beach. So they're firing in enfilade. So you can see they had a crust of defences, and this is what Hitler referred to as the crust, the cushion, and the hammer. The hammer, of course, being his armoured formations, which he thought would be far superior to anything that the Allies would have. And we're talking here about 12th SS, for example, and all those sorts of formations. And they would be held in depth. They would identify where the Allies were going to land. They would then be mobilised to come and surge forward to attack the Allies when they're at their most vulnerable, when they're trying to secure a lodgement. Now, the crust here was actually quite thin, and we've discussed that. There was probably 20 to 30 soldiers occupying this whole position. That is not a lot of people. That is essentially a platoon plus, up to a company. And they would have had to cover up to 4 kilometres of land here, up to 4 kilometres. And that is why they needed these weapon systems to be in such strong positions, so they could rely on the defences rather than the individuals. Now, the cushion is this marshy land to the rear. The cushion is all of this swampy area which they could cover by fire, and that they could try and disrupt through flooding in the fields, etc., to try and prevent the Allies getting off the beach. Well, I absolutely love that. God, if I could do this as a full-time job, I'd be a very happy man. So here's one of those Tobruks I was just talking about. There would have been a German up there with a machine gun pointing straight down onto this beach as you're getting off your landing craft. And they're probably no more than 200 to 300 meters away from where the tide line is at the moment, which is pretty much the same state of tide as when the Allies landed here on D-Day. Now, if I just look down the beach towards the large bunker that we've just been to that had the artillery piece in there, between where I am now and that large bunker, which is no more than 300 meters away, there is a machine gun Tobruk nearest to that large bunker. Then there is a Tobruk which had a tank turret mounted on top. And then there is a ring stand, the very closest bunker, which could have had a 5 centimeter gun in there. Designed for taking out armour, of course. So just think about the concentration of defences all pointing out into the sea and along the beach from this position in such a small area. So now heading up to towards the top of the sand dunes, and we've got more of these Tobruks. This is a Tobruk here that's got a pintle mount in it for a machine gun. And this Tobruk is looking out to the rear of the position. You can see its field of view there. I mean, look at that field of fire if I go down to the ring stand position. Covering the rear of the position perfectly and covering along the rear of the position as well. So really well sighted. And actually this can fire down onto the beach as well. So this position here is perfectly sighted, provides cover for pretty much the whole position. But that's not all. There are 2 more Tobruks just behind that, providing protection to the rear of the position and out to the flank as well. It's absolutely extraordinary, this position, bristling with weapon systems. Okay, so I'm sat here in the lee of one of the machine gun Tobruks here, and this one was facing out towards the sea, but also down the beach, heading down towards the south. And I just wanted to touch on some thoughts I had when I very first came here, which was just how tightly compact all these defensive positions are. I mean, we've got 3 Tobruks within the space of 20 meters of each other. So it's really, really compact, huge concentration of firepower in this small area. So people obviously assume straight away that this is a really formidable position, and compared to other positions on this beach, it probably is. One of the issues that they had was that they had such an array of weapon systems here. So they had, I think it was 5 different weapon systems, 5 different types of cannon alone, whether it was Czech or French or German, and resupplying those, maintaining those, finding spares and parts for them, because if you've ever worked on any sort of armoured vehicle or any sort of weapon system in the army, they always break down. You always need spares, you always need parts, and you need people that are familiar with how to repair them. So that would have been an absolute nightmare. And then you have the different ammunition natures and calibers, etc., the preservation and care of that ammunition, the different types of fuses, the different types of primers, all these things have to be factored and considered. So actually it becomes more of a hindrance to have different types of weapon systems, just as it does to have different types of jeeps and different types of lorries and things like that if you're part of a mechanized force. So that should definitely be considered as well. And also, this stuff isn't exactly well camouflaged. It's not inconspicuous. The Allies would have known this position was here. They wouldn't have necessarily known what weapon systems were here. But they obviously made a decision to bypass this position because they landed further to the south. So I just thought it's really interesting to sit back and have a think about these positions when I'm here, rather than just filming it gun and go type thing. And it doesn't take away from the fact that those brave men still had to board a landing craft. They still had to brave the seas in what was essentially a storm the day before, and then land on a beach that had Germans in fortified positions firing down on them. I mean, the bravery is just remarkable, and it gets me every single time I come here. I try and not get swept up in the beauty of this place and the lovely weather that we're having. And I try and remember exactly what those people must have been feeling, and it always gets me. It always gets me. And I think that when you're watching these videos at home, or when you're visiting these places yourself, just always put yourselves in the shoes of the young boy from Pennsylvania, or from Texas, or from Ohio, or from wherever they were, who'd never left the US before, probably never been out of their state before, and then suddenly they found themselves in Europe fighting against tyranny. So that's my thought for today.